Hi again then guys, and welcome to, of course, another breakdown for one of the vehicles from the latest batch of cars. And of course it won't be the latest for that long, because pretty soon we'll be getting the newer batch of cars as well, many of which have been kind of leaked ahead of time. And of course, over the past few days, in fact, from late last week even, we've been covering those leaks and screen grabs a lot more so than the usual stuff, like the reviews and the tunes. So of course I wanted to get back to this, because there are two cars still from the 1.29 patch now, because of course we're now on 1.3, because that was a smaller update. So the 1.29 selection of cars, and the two that are left are the Mini and the Jaguar. Now we're going to take a look at the Mini tomorrow, and I'm going to do a tune most likely for the Mini and a review as well. However, you'll notice that today I did not do a tune for the Jaguar first, and there are kind of two reasons for that. Now the primary reason is because I was actually planning to do a completely different video earlier on today, something which has been requested quite a few times. Some of you on the Discord server will have already seen what it was, because I posted about it on there. It's basically like a half an hour video that I was going to release. I recorded the whole thing, lost all of the footage, just completely gone. Recorded it again without a script, so completely new dialogue all the way through, half an hour again, the entire audio corrupted. So in the end I wasted an hour and had nothing to show for it but a sore throat. So I thought, you know what, screw this, I'm just doing the tune for today, and I'll probably release the half-hour video as this week's Beards and Cars instead, because it's the right length for the video and it's a topic which a lot of people have asked me to cover. So the second reason why I haven't done a tune for the Jag yet is because to me this is the only car of the pack that it doesn't really have an obvious bent towards where you should tune it. It's not an obvious choice of drag car, or top speed car, or drift car, certainly not rally car, or even circuit car. It could potentially be useful as a Blue Moon Bay vehicle in N200 or N300, and I've actually tested it. I did test it in N300 in particular, and it really surprised me, pleasantly in fact, because it's actually really good through the corners on Blue Moon Bay, just like the Ferrari GTO really surprised me by how good that was as well. Unfortunately though, unlike the Ferrari, I personally don't find this Jag really to be quite quick enough to win. The laps are a little bit too slow, at least so far, so I might keep even refining that, but for the moment I'll probably end up doing some kind of circuit tune for it instead. Because the thing about the Jag, as we discussed in the overarching review for the pack, is that it has more authentic handling, because of course this is the first time we've ever had a premium E-Type in the series. It was in before, but never a premium car with an interior, and it feels authentic in as much as it doesn't feel very good. Through corners it's very wallowy, very tail happy. Even in this video you can see me wipe out from overcooking a drift, and of course sometimes I like to leave these little mistakes in the video because it makes it more interesting than just a flawless lap after flawless lap. So ultimately I will probably do a circuit tune for it, maybe N200, because you can utilise the advantages of a fast classic car much more so in those lower classes, because stuff like super sports cars typically can't go that low, so it tends to be a good advantage for them to have. But what about this car in its own right? How does it feel on its own, but also, even more importantly, you could argue, how does it feel compared to how it used to be before it was a premium? Because, of course, once you change a car to being a full premium, it can completely change the kind of characteristics that the vehicle has. It can totally change how competitive it can be. I mean, take a look on the opposite end of the spectrum in a negative way at the kind of change that we saw from the Zonda R earlier on in this same pack. In Gran Turismo 6, it was almost unbeatable for that kind of vehicle, those track-only supercars. But then now, apart from Group X, it just doesn't feel as quick or as OP as it used to. Even something like a Porsche RSR can come surprisingly close to how good it is, which you would not typically expect. However, with the Jag, I think that, for one thing, it's probably going to get a lot more attention now than it ever did in the past, because it's been in the franchise for quite some time, but it was always one of those cars for me that I lumped in with stuff like the Toyota 2000 GT, the Lancia Stratos to some degree, certainly the road version, the Mercedes Gullwing as well, and that is that they were really, really fast classics for top speed. All of those cars that I just mentioned could do like 220 miles per hour with a relatively modest amount of power, and for a classic, that was really good. in GT6. Now, of course, it doesn't have that kind of advantage, but the fact that it's more authentic, it looks better than it ever did before, it has the detailed interior, and as I've mentioned before with a couple of other cars, the fact that the car list itself is smaller. And the fact that people really do clamour for all of the new cars in these packs each month means that the Jag has way more exposure than it ever did in the past of the franchise, because in the past you pretty much had to deliberately choose to use this Jaguar. And of course that sounds like a stupid statement because you still do, but the choices are far more limited now when it comes to classics in particular, so this car undoubtedly, within the couple of weeks that we've had it, has probably had much more exposure thanks to livery editing, tuning, circuit racing, and even just driving it for the sake of seeing what it feels like, than in probably all of the past of the franchise put together from Gran Turismo 4 through to Gran Turismo 6. And that, I think, is one of the coolest things about GT Sport, for all of its potential faults, some of which are arguable, others of which aren't. That is one beneficial thing, that the cars that are added get a ton more use, generally speaking, unless they're in like Group X or something, than they ever had before. The Mini, for instance. How many people do you think just never even bothered to consider that car, let alone use it, compared to how many people have used it now? That's cool. And even though I'm not an E-Type fan myself, I certainly respect it for its historical significance, especially as far as British exotics go, and it is very cool that it is represented in the game in a much more, not necessarily fully realistic, but much more detailed, much more faithful way, at the very least visually, in terms of suspension travel, tyre deformation, than it ever had in the past of the franchise. The Jag was never much of a track car, it just doesn't have the proportions for it, and of course it's of its time. Back in the day, it felt great. Now times have simply changed, so just like an old school muscle car felt amazing back then, but feels very primitive now. Not necessarily that that's a bad thing, because it has charm and it's a collector's piece, but you're not going to take on a modern muscle car with a stock classic and expect to beat it, at least not most of the time. Likewise with the Jag, if you think you're going to take this up against an F-Type and win, you're probably going to be disappointed. However, as a classic, as a Jag for Jag fans, it's certainly nice to finally have that kind of look. In a very similar way to the Subaru 22B is such a huge cult classic and a fan favourite, and again, first time we've ever had it as a premium. Now, the one thing that has jumped a lot for this car is the price. It's one of the few occasions where the price has changed dramatically compared to what it used to be. If I recall correctly, I think this car was under 100 grand. I think it was like 90 or something like that, whereas now it's 170,000, which is an interesting change. It's a lot more than it was, but you can kind of get why. So ultimately, I would not recommend this necessarily for racing, or at least not racing as your first priority. I'd recommend this as one of those cars that you should buy if you really want it, and if you really like the E-Type, and then consider racing after that. So view racing as like an added bonus, like the cherry on top. Don't view it as the cake itself. The cake of owning this car is just enjoying it. Racing is just an added bonus on top. So that's it for my thoughts overall on the Jaguar. I will probably put out a tune for it later this week sometime, and that's it for this vid. So of course, I'll see you guys next time, and for now, as always, thanks for watching.